What exactly is the Foddian genre? What design tropes make a game Foddian? Everyone knows about Pokestuck, Getting Over It, and Jump King as being the leading examples of the Foddian game genre. But when it comes down to innovating and developing new Foddian games, what must a developer keep in mind in order to design a game that is true to the Foddian genre? Hey chat, I'm DanCorona, and if you've seen any of my recent videos, you'll know that Ludwig is hosting a game jam with the theme of the games being the Foddian genre. As a top 10 Pokestuck speedrunner, this game jam event made complete sense to jump in and make some content. Since then, I've made many friends with the developers through streaming their games, and I've tried to help out and give feedback through playtesting many of the submissions. Currently, I've played about 65 games and beaten around 35 of them. From being around this amazing game jam subcommunity of Ludwigs, I've witnessed some debates on what defines a true Foddian game.
What about that game was Foddian? See, checkpoints. Very Foddian. Yep. What else? Oh wait, that already beats the entire fucking genre, you idiot. Fucking dumbass.
As a Foddian veteran and content creator, that got me thinking. So today, we are going to thoroughly define what exactly is the Foddian genre. So, where do we begin? Let's start from where the name Foddian actually comes from. Developer Bennett Foddy is the creator of Getting Over It, which was the first mainstream game in the genre released in 2017. If we analyze the design of Getting Over It, we can start seeing the main core tropes of the genre. Let's start with the level. The level in Getting Over It is continuous. It's essentially one big obstacle course, and your goal is to be able to get from the start to the end. Upon taking a closer look, we see that the route snakes back and forth, going further and further up. In the areas going up the level, there are gaps strategically placed so that the player can fall, losing a small or large chunk of progress if the player makes a mistake. So from these observations, we can conclude that our first defining characteristic of the Foddian games is level design. Let's move on. Through watching Getting Over It gameplay, we can see the players of early skill levels having trouble climbing up the mountain with the unique mouse controls with the hammer. However, the longer the person plays, the better they become at climbing further and further up the mountain. If we jump many hours ahead to someone who has dedicated hundreds of hours to speedrunning, we can see masters tackling the level with incredible precision. From this, we can conclude that another defining trope of the genre is masterable movement mechanics. Getting Over It is where the genre started, and to me, the game perfectly displays the two main and most important factors that define a Foddian: its level design and its movement mechanics. A game that has top-tier level design and movement mechanics that complement each other leads to beautiful moments where the player feels a rush of adrenaline for having the skill to pull off difficult sequences. Let's get more in depth with the level design. All the big three games in the raw form were released with one continuous level that rose upwards, and while necessarily I don't think the map has to be a vertical design, it is the easiest way to organize the level because of the nature of the genre being known for falling and loss of progress. You need to find a way to make the player be able to lose progress in a way that feels fair to the player. If the player makes mistakes, there should always be a way to lose even a small chunk of progress, and in some cases all the progress through multiple mistakes in a row. A vertical climbing map is simply just the easiest solution because the falling aspect seems like a fair punishment to the player, which is why all the games stick to the trope. The maps from the start introduce the player to the movement mechanic in a controlled environment before getting increasingly difficult as the player progresses. This allows for the player to be grasped by the mechanic. It gives them some softballs to make the player feel accomplished and not intimidated by the unfamiliar game ahead of them. This right here is called pacing. You pace the map in order to not scare off the player from trying to reach the top. The gradual increase in difficulty will have the player thinking, well, if I can beat the last section, I can beat this one too. At a certain point, the player will come to a jump where they make a mistake and end up falling. This is where the player realizes, yeah, if I make a mistake, I could lose my progress. The more the player is comfortable with the movement and the more progress the player makes, the greater the falls become. However, it is important to note that a single fall rarely ever loses the player all their progress. Aside from some gimmicks like the snakes and Getting Over It in Pokestuck, when a player loses all their progress, it is almost always derived from the player chaining mistakes. All the big three give the player a chance to recover from a bad fall. This can be done in many different ways. It can be done through the level design, like Jump King's genius design, where they literally make the map with falls in mind. They lay out platforms in such a way where the player is guided through slopes and funnels to land on specific platforms that throw them back onto the route at a lower point on the map. Or they give the player a difficult jump to hit in order to get back on the route upwards. Getting Over It is also level design based, snaking the level upwards so that not every fall drops you down to the bottom. Pokestuck, on the other hand, uses a mixture of both. The snaking level helps recoveries just like the other two, but Supercrew also added the mechanic where the higher you fall from, the more powerful the jump back can be. It's not only a movement option that is explored throughout the map design, but a skillful way to recover. If you fall and get a flip on the way down, you can predict what kind of slope you're going to land on and angle your Pokestick back up in order to catch a ledge. With the extra boost from the height you just fell from, you will get a big boost jump launching you back up equidistant to the height you just fell from. This allows for the player to use their mastery of the controls to make a recovery after a mistake. While I think recoveries are important to the genre, checkpoints are not a method of recovery in Foddian games. Checkpoints essentially allow the player to skip the loss of progress and reduce the risk of mistakes. This essentially ruins the feeling of accomplishment you get by mastering a section of the map, because you are now skipping the previous sections every time you make a mistake. Another point to add is that the level design should be clear enough so the player knows exactly where they need to go at all times. I wish I could look around. Where am I going? What is happening here? It is incredibly frustrating for a player if they get to a point where there is a high risk of losing progress and they have no idea where to go. Jumps that force you to go off screen to bring a platform into view are unfair to the player. A quick solution to this is giving the player the option to look around so they can see the level design and come to a clear solution about how to advance. Another very important point is that the player should never feel like falling and losing progress was anyone's fault but their own. Fighting games are never unfair to the player. In fact, the genre is innately a 100% fair to the player experience. Alright, now let's talk about the movement mechanic. The movement mechanic is equally important in the Foddian genre. It is usually the thing that the designer thinks of first when coming up with an idea for a Foddian game. You need to create a player experience where they feel 100% in control of the character if they can master the controls. Even if they aren't fully in control, they need to feel like they are. For example, when a person plays Pokestuck for the first time, the character starts bouncing around, which might seem like you have no control over the entity. However, with the movement mechanic, you feel like you have full control over the character because you have enough movement options in order to be in full control. You decide the angle of rotation and jump power of the character, giving the player full control only if they can learn to master the techniques. With that being said, let's talk about movement options. The more movement options the player is given, the more difficult and complex you can make the level design. With more movement options, you are essentially giving the player more control over the character, opening up different combinations of input opportunities to hit complex and difficult designed jumps. You should be giving your player a large amount of variation in what they can do with the mechanic giving to them. We can look at Jump King for a simple example of variation in a mechanic. Jump King has two movement options, walk and jump. The variation in movement in Jump King comes from the placement of the Jump King on the platforms given, the direction you input for the Jump King to jump, and the amount of time you hold the jump input. All three of these movement options give a plethora of variation, giving the player infinite possibilities to go about finding the right solution to hit a jump. The timing on the power of the jump is what makes Jump King so difficult, as you have a limited amount of time to hold down a jump, and a large quantity of timings that change the power and arc of the Jump King's jump. This creates a challenging movement mechanic that is intuitive but yet hard to master. Before I move on, I feel as though it's important to realize that you should design the level and character's movement at the same time, in order to make the Foddian game feel great. The level design and the movement mechanic must be complementary, meaning together they are in sync and feel like a great sandbox for the player to master the movement. While the Foddian genre was very specific in my mind beforehand, the game jam hosted by Ludwig opened my mind to the amount of combinations in movement mechanics and level design that could flood this genre with releases. It is not an easy genre to innovate and make new games for whatsoever, because of its specific tropes and feel that the design needs to give the player. It's almost like the middle ground between a platformer and a rage game that's completely fair to the player and makes them feel like they've overcome an incredible task by mastering the movement and climbing to the summit. The games are remembered by outsiders for the falls and the anger the games cause, but the player remembers the game for how amazing it feels to master the movement and overcome the obstacles faced before them. It's why so many people come back to the genre over and over, whether it's to pick it back up where they left off and complete the journey, or to set a new personal best and push for the world record leaderboards. It's why the genre is so dear to gamers like me and Ludwig, and why I continue to make content about the genre. So, I hope this helps define exactly what the Foddian genre is. And if you're still confused, get top 10 in Pokestuck. Then come talk to me.
No, I'm not gonna beat your run. If I wanted to beat my time, I wouldn't try to beat you. I would try to beat the best. Alright? I don't shoot to beat 115. I shoot to beat first. I have no interest in beating your run. If you get top 10, hit me up.